I am Liz Mosley. Welcome to this Tortoise ThinkIn. We're trying something a little bit different with a slightly different way of welcoming you all, a slightly different way of letting you all know how to want to think in. So I don't need to say that stuff, which is rather nice, which means I can just crack on with the topic of this evening's thinking, which is about imposter syndrome. Now, speaking as somebody who has zero marketing or journalistic qualifications, I appear to have a 25-year career doing something approaching both of them, and imposter syndrome is something that I would experience every day of my working life. I'm hoping that the moment when somebody comes up behind me and taps me on the shoulder and says, there's been a terrible mistake, we don't want you to do this anymore, I'm hoping that won't happen live on the ThinkIn, but if it does, my apologies to you all. Thank you for being here, and of course to our esteemed lineup of invited speakers. We're joined by Rita Clifton, by Stevie Spring, and by Sir Combo, who is the CEO of Career Ready, who are a great friend and partner organisation of Tortoise, who bring to this conversation a variety of perspectives that I think is going to be really, I hope is going to be really helpful for people. Now, in the when you booked your tickets and things for this evening, we asked a question where we asked people to say if they'd experienced imposter syndrome at work before or not. And for the people that answered the question, you didn't have to, because we tried to make it as less faff as possible. 78% said they had, which is there or thereabouts in line actually with sort of bigger, more robust studies that ask people if this is something that they are familiar with. So if I can perhaps go to Rita Clifton, who's had a really illustrious career in a number of extraordinary organisations, such as in JWT, in advertising and branding. You've written this book. It's called Love Your Imposter. It was going to be called something rather ruder sounding, but we decided to change the title, Naked and Unprepared.
That's right. Yes, exactly. Yes. It was originally going to be called Naked and Unprepared. And I guess that was a joke that nevertheless reflected a bit of a truth, which is that, you know, like a lot of people, I have felt exposed on a regular basis in my working life. And I felt that, you know, any moment someone's going to tap me on the shoulder and go, do you know, actually we've made a bit of a mistake, you don't really belong here. Or otherwise the feeling that, you know, this time is going to be the time it all goes pear-shaped, and that, you know, it's all going to hang out and everything else. So this, I have found, is a very common feeling. Something like 70% of people seem to experience something like the imposter syndrome. And I should just say, by the way, my very nice publisher tactfully said they felt the name needed to be changed and that it should be called Love Your Imposter, because they picked this up obviously as a theme in the book. They were worried it was going to get a bit of the wrong end of the rude stick.
The algorithms might have allocated it to the wrong part of the website potentially.
It could possibly be in that, but nevertheless, I mean, I, like a lot of people, actually I say this, and it'd be great to hear people's experiences, but, you know, there's also correlation with anxiety dreams and things like that, where, you know, you're being chased, or otherwise you haven't done your homework, or you haven't prepared enough for a conference, and you appear on stage and you suddenly notice that you don't seem to have any clothes on either. So there's a whole series of things, and obviously there are some at the more light-hearted end of the spectrum, but clearly there are other feelings and emotions that are at the heavier end of the spectrum, and imposter syndrome can really, really be debilitating for a lot of people. So having seen that, I just thought, you know, I've experienced it. There are certain things I've done in my working life, mistakes that I've made and things that I've learned and so on, and I wanted to share those, ideally before I kick the bucket. And I just, as I say, I wanted to share them and to go, actually, this is a normal human thing. And frankly, the world needs more normal, you know, decent human beings in charge. You need empathy in a modern business. And so I just wanted to make sure that I got that message across and say there are things that you can do about it too. So
I
That's
think
what I
it's a brilliant setup, and I really enjoyed the book. It's super accessible, and don't be fazed by Rita's super successful starry life and the fact that some woman called Hillary Clinton has read it and found it helpful, because it's super accessible and very practical as well. But because it's not just a memoir, there's lots of stories about your career, and this is where I made a mistake, and this was embarrassing, and all of that stuff. But the premise that you just touched on a little bit there is that this thing that we call imposter syndrome, which is a common term now, we sort of are familiar with it, we know what we mean by that, is that it's not only lots and lots of people, the majority of people experience it, but perhaps there's an element of it that there's an element of it that is helpful, that it's good to feel grateful, and it's good to be reminded and to be humble, and that the corporate world isn't human enough. And there's a sort of a sentence when you said maybe we should think of it as being a sort of a syndrome of just being human rather than something that's unique, that needs to be fixed.
Yes, absolutely. And business has got a bit of a problem at the moment. I mean, obviously most of my working life has been spent in business, and I just got a bit miserable about the fact that somehow business is caricatured by being populated with Dr. Evils, who wake up and want to despoil the environment and rip off shareholders and everything else. And that's not my experience. But business people, business leaders have a habit of allowing themselves to be caricatured. But on the loving your imposter as opposed to fighting with it, that was a really important part of what I wanted to get across in the book as well. And in fact, when I was explaining this to somebody who happened to be a martial arts expert, now I wouldn't know one end of a judo, move from another, but this person said to me, actually, I recognize that from martial arts, which is actually, you don't fight your opponent, you use your opponent's weight.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting. And actually, I think in some ways, because imposter feelings are really quite common feelings, it does make you start to feel, actually, maybe there is a use here. Maybe there is actually something about not feeling altogether prepared, or not feeling altogether as though, you deserve to be there, that drives you to try harder or practice harder or work harder, and that provides some energy in order for you to improve and develop yourself. Now, clearly that's a more positive angle on it, and it has been quite useful from time to time. And clearly there is a lot of stuff that needs to happen around that to make sure that people don't get debilitated by this. So it was just really interesting, both reflecting on it, reflecting on some experiences, and also reflecting on some of the research and what I gathered from many other people that they found too, and also particularly found to be useful, because I hope that what I try and do is provide a lot of practical stuff in the book about what you can do, to learn how to communicate, develop certain sorts of relationships, understand the numbers and the finance and so on. I mean, there's a whole series of things that you can do in order to really, really make the most of this drive and energy. I recognize you, imposter, and I'm going to use you, as opposed to struggle with it, which can just put you in a slightly difficult place and a negative spiral.
I was really interested to read that you're a fan of personal development and all kinds of things. I mean, across the span of your career, you've walked across hot coals in the car park of the O2 Centre or something. You've done all kinds of stuff. And now I am an appalling cynic, and I am the one who sits in the corner with a face like thunder and won't join in. In fact, my best friend in the world, she and I were the only two on a corporate kind of development weekend that refused to walk over broken glass, and I was like, that's the woman I'm going to be friends with. But I was really interested that you got a lot out of putting yourself into those situations and trying to kind of drag something out of it. Do you think, I guess at the moment, there's a lot of talk, isn't there, about employers becoming more empathetic, worrying about the people as much as the planet, as much as profit. All of that kind of, it was very trendy in the 90s to send people up poles and on boats, do all that weird stuff that we used to have to do. Do you have a sense that employers in general are thinking differently about how they look after their employees, and that whole bring your whole self to work?
I do, and that makes both human sense and also makes business sense, frankly, as well, because, you know, for a long time, companies could pretend that they were smiley customer service organisations on the outside, and they could be axe murdering cultures on the inside, you know, and they could, if they had a decent marketing department, decent PR department and so on, they might be able to get away with it, but now you cannot. What happens inside gets to the outside with the scale and the speed that will take your breath away. And so therefore, if you don't have people who work in your company, who care about what they do, they understand what it is that, you know, the company's about, and they want to support that, then actually you're not making the most of, again, the talents and the energy and so on inside the organization, which I think is sad. And I think that, you know, companies, whether it's because they're worried about, you know, being exposed for being bullies or not having a positive culture, or whether or not actually we're having a different sort of leader, and I do feel strongly that we both are seeing and need many more different sorts of leaders. And I have to say that's slightly code for saying we need a much better balance, chemical balance at the top of organisations, which is not very subtle code for saying we need a lot more women right at the top of organisations as well, just to balance things up, again, from this sort of mixture point of view. But I really do think that there is a different kind of leader, there's a different sort of organisation that we're seeing, both for negative reasons, because they don't want to risk it, and bullying is a very expensive, risky word these days, but also they realise they want to make the most of, you know, the talents and the motivations of the people, because you can't bully people senseless and expect them to give you lots and lots of voluntary effort. So I applaud this, and I applaud better metrics that are about as much about social and environmental things as they are about economic things, because this is what makes organizations sustainable and so on. So I want to keep a positive face on this, and, you know, it's easy to get miserable when you see some of the people who are running major parts of the world at the moment, and what they're getting away with and what they're saying, and people supposedly supporting them. But all I'm saying is we all need to become leaders and great communicators, so that actually we can put some weight on the other camp, so that actually we're creating a more positive balance, more human balance in organizations, both in business and also more broadly. So, and I think that if anyone on the call is capable of running an organization, I think the world needs you to try and do it. And there are many things you can do to make sure you put yourself in the position of making that happen.
Excellent. Thank you so much. It's quite a nice segue. I mean, Rita, it's almost like we practiced it into the sort of second chunk of the conversation, because as well as the empathy sort of thread through the book, there's a strong thread through the book about leadership and equality in particular that you touched on just now. And I think I might try another, because we're in the mode of experimentation with new formats, we're going to try and do a live poll. So if everybody would approach gently their machine, and my colleague who hides behind ThinkIn is going to put a question on the screen that I'd love for you to click and tell me what you think of. Do you think everybody is equally susceptible to imposter syndrome? Yes, no, not sure. Now I can see the live stats as they come in. I don't know if you actually can, but when we close it in a second, we'll just let it run. Oh, interesting. You've got another 10 seconds to press your button, and then we'll show you the results, because I want to come in a second to Takumbo, who runs Career Ready. Okay, that's it. Let's share the results. So you should be able to see that on your screen. We've got 16% of people think everybody is equally susceptible to it, and 75%, so the vast majority, saying no, that it perhaps affects some people more than others. And there are a couple of members who wrote to me before this ThinkIn that I wanted to play in now with some of their personal experiences. Is Daniel there? Daniel, let me just check your surname. Daniel Odutola. There you are. Hi, Daniel.
Yep. Hi.
I love the comment that you wrote to me before the ThinkIn, because you experience imposter syndrome, but you're not sure everybody else does. Just tell us, where do you work?
So I've actually just finished my MBA, but prior to that, I spent my time in communications consultancy, so working for the likes of WPP, and also working directly for some politicians, including our current Prime Minister.
Well, congratulations on your MBA.
Thank you.
That's a big old achievement. Just tell us a little bit about the comment that you sent to me beforehand, because I thought it was interesting, your observations.
Sure. I think a lot of this is about representation. I personally have suffered from imposter syndrome, but I think that is greatly because a lot of the spaces that I've been into, especially prior to my studies, were spaces that people that look like me were never in. So if I look at the top of those organizations, I would often struggle to genuinely think and believe that I could also get there. It's only been after my studies and I've got to work with more diverse companies, including big tech companies like the likes of Google, that I've seen other people that look like me, and that thought process that I can't quite do it disappears a little bit because that representation is there. And I think that is why often when I'm talking to other people about imposter syndrome, it tends to be kind of very much like we touched on earlier, it tends to be from those groups of society that are a little bit marginalized. A lot of female friends and colleagues often also feel it. A lot of minorities often feel it, whereas I don't get that sense from those who do look up and do see lots of people like them and from similar backgrounds themselves.
Yeah, interesting. Thanks ever so much, Daniel. Actually, funnily enough, she says, taking the opportunity to do a brief plug. We have a, it's not quite representation, but I think it's an important element of the whole responsible business picture. Our Responsible Business Summit is on the 15th of October, and these sorts of things are very much live issues that we look at and work on a lot at Tortoise. I might come to Combo now, if I can, as CEO of Career Ready, before we just go to Ella, who's going to share some data with us, because to come out, well, first of all, do you get it? Do you feel like an imposter in your brilliant job and your brilliant career? Are you there, Combo? Oh, he was. I hope we haven't lost him.
Hi, I am here.
Slight panic. You're there. Do you experience imposter syndrome? Do you feel like a fake and a fraud?
I have felt like that in my career, and I've kind of boiled down the essence to it feeling like a fear of being inadequate. Or not necessarily having the correct credentials to be in the position that I've held at that point in time. And sometimes that's been kind of crystallized by a very simple experience. And one particular example that comes to mind for me is I was an invited guest at an awards dinner for the motoring industry. And when I arrived, it was a black tie event. And I was the only person of color that was in the hotel, and it was, I think, over 500 guests. Wow. And one individual assumed I was working and gave me, or attempted to give me, their champagne glass. And it was like, at that moment, I kind of, all the insecurities that I grew up with just came to the fore. So it gave me a little wobble at that point, and this was going back about 12 years ago now, but I still remember it as clear as yesterday. So the fear of feeling inadequate isn't there anymore, but the sentiment of feeling that I am not of the kind of profile that people expect, and the reaction sometimes, it can conjure up certain insecurities within me. But what I've learned to do over the years is not try to, as Rita was referring, not try to suppress that fear, but actually use it as a tool. So it's about a negotiation within my mind of how I see that fear, either as a tool as a tool that I can build upon, or rather than it being something that I allow to suppress me in any environment, whether it's in my day job as a chief exec, or whether it's taking part in one of my pastimes, whether that's doing a triathlon or Wing Chun Kung Fu, or whatever it may be. It's understanding that failure is part of life, and being someone that's fairly positively minded, I try and see failure as an opportunity to learn. What was the learning in that? And then I think it comes back to the culture that I want to live my life by, and the culture that I want the organization that I'm leading to have. And the culture is not achieving things or things not going to plan is normal. It's part of life.
Yeah.
I think it's really important that you build a culture where you normalize that, and maybe don't badge it as failure, badge it as learning. Obviously, there are certain expensive lessons that don't need to be repeated on occasion, but the idea of a staff team having the confidence that they have the opportunity to learn on the job, then can activate so much growth, so much innovation, so much creativity. And I think that's where you're able to kind of reduce that feeling of fear of being inadequate, because you've been given license to be yourself. You've been given license to learn something. And I believe in lifelong learning. So I'm constantly throwing myself into circumstances and situations that force me to learn. When I did a triathlon, I learned how to do open water swimming on YouTube. I had to, once I'd taken part in the London Triathlon and I had my wetsuit on, there was no turning back. The fear, I had to use that as a positive energy component. So yeah, I think there's a lot to do with the mind, and it's a lot to do with how you negotiate those kind of gremlins in your mind, and how you allow that to manifest. That's been my best experience.
Sorry, I didn't mean to speak. I love that idea of negotiating with your own sort of inner gremlins. I don't think I'm very good yet at negotiating with mine. Now we've got some absolutely brilliant comments and things coming in. I am going to come to Stevie Spring in a second, because she's brilliant and hilarious, and can help us talk about, as chairperson of Mind, the mental health charity, the sort of when this feeling of imposter syndrome can become really quite difficult. But before we get to Stevie, I'd love to come to perhaps Georgia, who's made a brilliant comment in the chat, and I love Aid Clulo, who's giving a kind of personal story that I'd love if you're comfortable to share it with. Aid, are you there? Aid Clulo, MBE no less. Are you there? Let's see if we can find you. We've got quite a big crowd, so it might take my colleagues a little while to find you in the list. Searching Aid. Are you there? Not at the moment. Well, let's try for Georgia if we can. Oh, there you are, Aid. We found you. Hello. I loved your story. Just share a little bit about your idea, because working in the military is somewhat different from working in an advertising agency. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's very similar. I don't know. Let's find out. Oh, we can't hear you. Hold on. Are you switched on? This is the fun of a live event. Aid, we'll come back to you in a sec if we can try and fix your audio. Let's try Georgia Walters, about your sort of journey with self-confidence and self-acceptance and all of that. Georgia, are you there? Oh no, it's going to be one of those evenings, isn't it? We're going to be failed. I don't think we can get Georgia either. Not to worry. Let's go to Stevie, because we do know that Stevie can at least hear us and see us. Hi, Stevie. I'm so sorry.
I can hear you and see you.
Excellent start. Now, you've had a massively successful career in a similar field, actually, to where Rita has sort of built her career. And now you do all kinds of things. And one of the hats that you wear, one of the many hats that you wear, is as chairperson of Mind. And we were just talking briefly before the ThinkIn started about how it can be the case that repeated issues of self-esteem, when you experience them again and again and again and again, it can turn into something more sinister than just something that's a bit difficult in the context of work. And just tell us a little bit about how that can pan out for people.
Yeah, I think it's all a question of degree, and low self-esteem and low self-confidence can become exaggerated. Particularly, we've seen it in lockdown. you know, a lot of people suffering unnecessarily. It's been quite extraordinary how many people have had mental health imposter syndrome. You know, I don't deserve treatment. I don't deserve help. There are lots of people worse off than me. And it's exactly the same in terms of the sort of competitive comparator group. So in exactly the same way as there's always going to be someone, you know, cleverer, richer, better, more successful, prettier, you know, whoever you choose. If you're David Beckham, you can turn around and go, oh my God, I've never won Wimbledon. If you're Barack Obama, you can go, oh, I'm not as rich as Trump. It depends who you compare yourself to. And that's the sort of internal versus external validation. And I think what we have to be aware of is the spectrum of inverted commas disability. And I think, you know, to the title of Rita's book, embracing your imposter to make you strive to be better, fantastic. Exaggerating it to the point of it being debilitating, you know, then we need to work differently. And as I say, I think that, you know, I, you know, suffered through my 20s and 30s like everybody else with the sort of fluffy bunny syndrome of working in advertising. And I think I sort of grew out of it when I realized that if I was an employer, I'd employ myself because I was worth my salary. And to Combo's point of walking in to somewhere where you feel other. So the difference in feeling an imposter versus, you know, an example from maybe a year ago, I was working on a deal and I walked into the lawyer's boardroom. All the advisors were there on the deal. I was the only inverted commas client there. And I walked into this boardroom, there's maybe 40 people there. Every single one of them was white, male, wearing a suit, maybe between, you know, 40 and 55. And I walked in slightly late. And instead of feeling, oh my God, I don't belong here, I burst out laughing. And the guy who was hosting said, you know, what are you laughing at? And I went, look, you know, it's 2019. Of course I'm going to laugh. And I think that pivoting of how you view yourself and living up to your own expectations, in the same way as when we're managing people, I think that they live up to our expectations, or indeed down to our expectations of them. We live up to or down to our expectations of ourselves. So I think that there is, you know, there is huge value in lived experience, and we have to learn that, you know, our opinion, our perspective is completely unique to us because nobody else has had it. And of course, there are issues where you need some technical knowledge. So when Rita talks about us needing to learn the language of finance, well, yes, of course you do, but you don't have to be an accountant. And I think there are some basics, particularly if you're from, you know, fluffy, bunny industries. But, you know, a bit like when you reverse mentor, there is valuable perspective in all of us through our unique lived experience. And to learn to love that perspective and have confidence in that perspective and have value in what you're bringing to a group or a team, I think is really, really, really important. But I think that the key point that I would make is, you know, you have to try and keep a balance on loving your imposter and using that to spur you on, and allowing it to get out of hand to the point where it's debilitating. And a lot of that is the internalization of what is your competitive comparator group. Who are you choosing to compare yourself to? Because there are always going to be more people behind than there are in front, by whichever criteria. And we can always choose, you know, you very sweetly said stellar career, but I can sit here and say, oh yeah, but I've never won Miss World. I'm a failure. Not that that's a really bad exemplar, but But you know, it depends who you are comparing yourself to.
Yeah.
And I think we need to accept that the attraction of confidence is self-fulfilling.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Stevie, a very wise woman who happens to be my boss and on this ThinkIn, once said to me, make friends with finance. It's the #1 rule of building your career in marketing. And there's a whole chapter in Rita's book about knowing your numbers. And if you ever wanted to know, do you know, I was reading the book and there's lots in it to enjoy, but I had a really big cheesy grin on my face when it got to the chapter, which was literally, okay, this is what a balance sheet is. This is how you read it. This is the definition of all the terms. Like I say, super practical. I'm going to go to Hester if I can, because she's ready to share. Hiya, Hester. Oh, new hair.
Yeah, new hair.
Nice.
Thanks. Yeah, blonde for the summer, red for the winter has often been my sort of fallback too.
Tell us your story, because it's an interesting one about imposter syndrome.
So yeah, I'm really sorry. I joined the chat late because I was working late. I've just started a new job and it's quite intense, and I kind of forgot that this was happening, and then realised I really wanted to join. So it's my story is something it's live and it's happening now. So I'm battling through the NHS to get a diagnosis for my autism.
Right.
And I realised, I mean, I am autistic. I know I am. I tried to get a diagnosis last year. And it went really wrong because if you've gone 30 years hiding and masking your oddities, and I believe as women are more inclined to pull their attention in, whereas men can just put their attention out there and say what they think. Women pull it in all the time. It's what the mother does. It's what you think, how is your child responding? And as a teenager, you think, is my skirt too short? That's what we do. So women are really good at masking it. So I'd gotten so good at masking that, like I'd almost gone my whole life without having all these thoughts in my head and thinking in a slightly abstract way without anyone really ever understanding. And a couple of years ago, it was actually my sister who picked me up for her child was diagnosed with autism, and she did a lot of research. Took some years to get that diagnosis, and she picked me up for my oddities, and she's encouraged me to go on with it. So I tried to get a diagnosis, but when you're really good at masking stuff, and I think this is where imposter syndrome kicks in a bit, I'm really good at I spent my whole life just adapting to the crowd and never really saying what I thought and just blending in. And for that reason, I've had it's really funny, my life story. I've 30 years old, I've worked for 23 different companies, and it's kind of abstract, the life route I've had. Everyone thinks I've had just like an oddball with loads of funny stories, but to me there's kind of a reason why I think in a different way, and I didn't know how to express that. So I'm still trying to get that. When I first went for a diagnosis last year, the NHS, you've got to meet a team of multidisciplinary psychologists who pin you out for various different other types of personality stuff, or types of crazy, as I know I shouldn't say that, but stuff. And last year, because it comes so instinctively to me to blend in and mask out, I couldn't even really tell these psychologists what I was saying. And I got given a half strange diagnosis for something that didn't fit. But I've through my sister persevering with me, I've kind of learned to be a bit more honest and about how I think. And this time I've passed that sort of screening test. I'm being referred. It's like a long waiting list on the NHS, but they believe I am autistic, so I'm hopefully going to get it. But I think that's kind of how it fits in with imposter syndrome. I feel so heavily that it's so you can almost do a whole life just adapting to this imposter thing and just blending in with the crowd and not actually telling anyone what you think. But for me, I've kind of learned ultimately it eventually it catches you up and it tricks you out. And I think it's really, I love joining conversations like this. And if everybody could just be more honest and open about how we think and how we operate, then that's really hopeful for me.
Well, good luck, Hester. Thank you. It's lovely to see you. I've not seen you for a bit, but good luck with your extraordinary odyssey through the NHS bureaucratic diagnostic process. We wish you all the best. I think that might be a good moment. I'm going to come back to Rita, if I can, there's some great comments in the chat. Maybe Jennifer Allerton might weigh in. And I missed some comments from Yasmin earlier on that I think are important to come back to as well, because I wonder, Rita, given the themes in the book we talked about before, there's this thing about humanizing and empathy in the corporate world, and then there's this thing about equality and leadership. I wonder if by calling it imposter syndrome, we're sort of naming it as an internal issue that actually is more a manifestation of external things that are happening to us. And obviously it's probably a bit of both, but there's a part of me that thinks, are we labeling imposter syndrome something that really is should just be called inequality or discrimination or something in that space? What do you think of that?
Well, frankly, just being human. I mean, I think, you know, when I was looking at imposter syndrome and seeing how many people experienced it, and I think we've already raised the fact that something like 90% of people in the creative industries seem to experience this. It does feel just more like this is a very normal human thing, that we can all worry about stuff. We can all worry that we're not good enough. We can all worry that, you know, we're not trying hard enough or whatever. And I love the last comment and the last conversation about honesty, because actually, you know, by sharing something honest about yourself, you can often generate stronger relationships with your work colleagues, let alone your friends, because actually, you know, it's good to understand people. It's frankly really good to understand yourself, you know, and doing some work on yourself, and whether it's counselling or therapy, or you talked about some of the self-development programs. I find those are very practical, helpful use for that. And some of them are a bit woo-woo and weird. And I did do the running over hot coals with bare feet, and you don't burn your feet if you go for, I mean, and Tony Robbins and, you know, visualization and Paul McKenna. I've done a lot of those programs. You know, I've written letters to my dead, angry letters to my dead father. I've done a lot of that stuff. And the way I see that is just that these are all tools to really kind of help you understand yourself and what you're good at. And getting to that level of honesty and understanding, I think, is a really good starting point. But the other thing about the other side of honesty, as you know, one of the chapters in the book is called Why You Don't Have to Fake It to Make It. I mean, this is a real hobby horse of mine. That whole sort of, you've got to fake it, and somehow you've got to make this artificial construct, third-party construct, and sort of strut into it. And that, I get really, really cross about that, because that makes people think that somehow they've got to act. And that's the opposite of what we need in people's working lives at the moment. We want humans at work, not some sort of people acting out what they think it's like, either to be successful or to be this role or that role. You can be yourself. And there are tools and techniques and things that you can do to give yourself more confidence that will enable you to move forward, but as yourself. And I don't like that language, as I say, faking it. So I think there are a lot of things here about honesty and authenticity. These are words, obviously, that are very, very, you know, widely used right now. And a lot of, you know, talking companies about, you know, purpose and, you know, making sure we've got more soul in the business. Well, great stuff. And now we need to make sure that that shows up in operations and policies, the way people treat, you know, their staff, and also treat the wider community, and also how people are measured. Because it's all great talking about this stuff. If you're working in an organization that frankly has still got only, you know, profit measures, and that's as a proxy for short-term decisions and short-term results. I think we're all talking about developing longer-term sustainable businesses, because that's the way you get to, you know, create stable jobs for people, and also the kind of, you know, stable wealth that we've got to earn in order to pay for civil society and schools and hospitals. So we need good businesses to generate the kind of reliable earnings to make sure we can pay for these things. And, you know, not all Dr. Evils work in business, not all saints work in the public sector. You know, actually, we need to make sure that we are bringing people's individual humans out wherever they work and connect with each other as human beings. And that demands a level of honesty and understanding, and for people to stop, you know, stop sort of almost working out some of their issues on people around them. We need to, you know, make sure we're lifting people that we work with and that we live with, and so on. And there's also quite a lot in the book about nice guys don't finish last, because that's the other thing that gets you on a soapbox.
Yeah.
I was going to say, don't start me on that one.
Thank you, Rita. I'm going to go now to Lisa Gordon, if I can, who my colleague Tessa Murray has voluntold in the chat is going to. Hi, Lisa. Tessa tells us that you're turning around a very male organisation, so you've got some experience of this chemical imbalance at the top altogether. To tell us a bit about how you're coping with all of that stuff.
Well, also hi to Stevie, who I haven't seen for ages, but I love Stevie and I think she's talked so much sense. Hi, Stevie. Look, I mean, I've had pretty much all my career. I mean, I'm 54 now, and all my career's been spent pretty much in a male-dominated world.
What sector do you work in, Lisa? What do you do?
Well, I was in the city, then in media, and actually I've now got 5 non-exec roles, including chairing an investment bank, which is probably the one Tess is talking about. So, I mean, you know, I don't know whether it's actually so much about being in a male world. I don't think it is, to be honest. I think what I've discovered now over all these years is that it is literally, as so many people have said, it is about honesty and authenticity and all that. It's also, and I think this is where we all have a responsibility to each other. It's actually how people make you feel. So, for example, it's so rare, and particularly the higher up the chain you go, where people actually tell you, people say something positive about, you know, thank you, you've done a great job, I really appreciate it, I know it's difficult. All those things make you feel valued and do so much to countering what everybody has said, which is that imposter syndrome really is an external thing rather than an internal thing. And you know, I can empathise with everything that everybody's already said on the call, and it really came to a head for me about 4 years ago when I was working in a particularly toxic environment, and I was, you know, senior in that environment, but that didn't make much difference. I was actually told my problem was I was too mumsy, which was just literally stopped me in my tracks, because it was obviously offered up as a criticism. And actually I realised now that what I am is I'm a nurturer of talent. And if actually some guy that feels threatened wants to disparagingly label that as mumsy, you know, that's his problem, not mine.
Yeah.
And so I just really would echo what everybody has said, which is it really is about being authentic. I mean, I had a call today from one of the, I'm sit on the board of MC Saatchi, and they've had all sorts of problems in the last 12 months. And I had a call from one of the founders today just saying, you know, we're just so grateful for everything you're doing. And I thought, you know, he doesn't need to make that call to a board member, but it matters. So that's how I think you have to have seen bad behavior to recognize it and then to help inform your own behavior. And I really just try and take that forward, just, you know, always, you know, just make people feel that they're valued. But also I think the most important thing, and I think particularly, well, I was going to say particularly for women, I don't think that's true. I think what we all need is we need role models that say it's okay to drop the ball. Somebody said earlier, you know, very few mistakes are you know, can't be remedied or sorted out. And I think if people, you know, all we hear about is the amazing trajectories of success, but actually, you know, all of us have dropped the ball on more than one occasion. And I think for so many people that then becomes a point at which they lose their confidence and they can't get back on track. And that is such a loss of talent and such a tragedy, you know, on so many fronts. So, you know, that's something I was given that support very early on when I made a massive mistake, and you know, it's enabled me to continue and still, you know, have the career that I've got. So I think I hugely admire the Career Ready team, and I did some work with them a couple of years ago, and that was a message that I was trying to send out to the girls that I worked with in the seminar is, you know what, you're going to trip over, just pick yourself up, dust yourself down, but I have to say it's very, very sad state of affairs, but at 54, I can count on one hand my girlfriends that still work, and that's because they stumbled and then they felt they'd fallen for good.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lisa. There's a lot of love for an agreement with what Lisa's been saying in the chat, and where look at Stevie's whoop whoop. She wants to come see it. Stevie, what have you got to say? Come to Stevie.
I wanted to interject and reassure for Lisa for a second, because there is a direct, it's in direct proportion that the more you know you don't know. So, you know, if you ask somebody who is not a horse rider, who's ridden twice, can you ride? They are likely to say yes. If you ask somebody who's just come third in an eventing competition, they are likely to say yes a bit, because they know what they can't do.
Yeah.
And my all-time classic on that was when we just won quite a big piece of business where the client only spoke French. And I pulled in two potential leaders on the account, one male, one female, guess which one, and said, do either of you speak French? And they both said together, yes, A-level, no, only A-level.
Interesting.
So that internal versus external, and how you perceive your own value, how you perceive your own experience, how you perceive your own expertise is really, really important. And that sort of self-esteem and confidence comes out.
Yeah.
So I think it's really interesting how we subdivide that, but it's a truism that the more you know about something, the more you no longer feel expert. There's always somebody else, and that comes right back to the comparator group and who you choose to compare yourself to.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much, Stevie. I'm going to come back to the combo because I want to ask about the work that you do with Career Ready. It's, on the one hand, I'm sort of conscious that we're hearing from Rita and Stevie and Lisa, people who've built their careers and are at you know, they've made it and are continuing to make it. But the work you do at Career Ready is with people who are at the very beginning of their journey and who face, you know, a number of, if you were going to line them up, you know, boxes that, you know, with crosses against them, they've got barriers to break down to get there. What are the sorts of things that you advise those people who are facing very real external factors that are going to count against them and are going to give all kinds of power to that inner imposter? What sorts of things can you do to help people just feel that power and not be scared?
Yeah, I think one of the simple things we can do is about be conscious around the language that we use to describe individuals. So in my sector, it's very common for young people to be described as disadvantaged or disaffected or marginalized, and all of these colourful phrases which are not empowering at all. So there's something around language and using our agency to actually focus on empowering these young people who have been through some of the most challenging things society could throw at them at a very early age in their life, and yet they're still there fighting on with aspirations, with, you know, an abundance of talent. So we're very conscious around the language that we use with young people, and we encourage young people to think about, you know, what they're taking in, what they're absorbing. Stevie mentioned the point about who you compare yourself to. And for us, we try and encourage young people. I mean, it's unrealistic for them to not compare themselves at all, but we try and take away the power of that notion of you need to compare yourself to this person or that person. You can take inspiration from traits of individuals. But we live in a society that's really fickle. We live in a society where, you know, the superficial notion is advertised and bombarded every day through thousands of messages. So the idea of that authenticity is about really understanding who you are and understanding your path is your unique path. And it's about focusing on what you have control over, So if a young person says they want to get into accountancy, or they want to get into architecture, or they want to get into construction, it's about really emphasizing what's in your control. How can you control, your path and making that a reality? And we use our agency as an organization, our network, to support that young person. So it could be about connecting them with the right internship opportunity, or the right mentors, or connecting them with awareness of what organizations are available in those particular industries. The reality is society is unfair, and we're not going to change it overnight, but it's definitely about focusing on what young people have, rather than emphasizing all of the things that they don't, which is out of their control.
Yeah. When you're working with kids who feel like it's just too hard, do you encounter, because I do still at age 44, sometimes I just think I just can't, we having one of those days where somebody will say something that the tone's a little bit off, or it hurts so much still. And I can only imagine what it must feel like to be 16 and 17 and thinking, well, I want to be an architect, and yesterday I felt like I could, and today I feel like I can't. How do you unwire some of those things when you just feel like, oh?
Yeah, so over the last 12 months, we've done a lot of work around resilience with the young people that we work with. And the reality is, many of those young people are pioneers when they look at their lived experience. They don't have architects or engineers or editors of national newspapers in their family. It's not normalized. So the fact is, they are going above and beyond anything that they would have seen in their family before. So there is a notion of constantly normalizing the idea of mental health. And we use the kind of analogy of comparing it to physical health. There is no stigma to people going for a jog, no stigma to people doing yoga or going to the gym. So we try and emphasize the idea of, how can you enhance your mental health? How can you make it stronger to handle the terrain that is ahead of you? Because the fact of the matter is, we don't have equality. We don't even have equity in society. So for these young people, it's about a notion of belief and helping them strategize and realize you are going to have fatigue, and it's okay. It's about managing that. It's not seeing it as a dead end. It's seeing it as part of that journey. So for us, I think a big part of our work is building trust with young people. And that kind of crosses over into business cultures as well. I think you will see, if a level of trust is instilled in a lot of businesses, it has an impact on the prevalence of imposter syndrome. But for the young people in particular, it's normalizing the fact that the terrain is tough. There are not many individuals that reflect your lived experience achieving the things that you're doing. You are pioneers. You are exceptional beings with an abundance of talent. So we're constantly, feeding positive affirmations to these young people, whether they trip and stumble. And we also are able to use alumni to show them what it can look like in 2, 3, 10, 15 years time.
Yeah.
So that kind of trust of them being able to communicate with an individual who is exactly in their position 3, 5 years ago is priceless.
Yeah, fab. Thank you so much. I'm going to go to Tom Westgarth if I can, because Tom's in a new job. You started a new job. Hiya, Tom.
Hello. Hi.
Hiya. You started a new job since lockdown, so you've been sort of trying to establish yourself within the box of Zoom.
Yeah, I mean, just to set out, I started it last week, so
Oh my gosh! Congratulations! What are you doing? What is it? Your first job?
My first full-time job. Yes, I'm working for an AI research consultancy.
Fantastic.
Firstly, what Takuma said, it really struck a chord with me in terms of the idea of what's in your control, and that being quite an empowering mechanism by which to try to deal with the situation that you're in. But I mean, I will say to begin with, the team that I'm with are lovely. They're all very smart, very kind. If any of them are there, I'm not sure if they're lurking in the background. Who knows? but the problem that I'm having at the moment is the real, not only do I have imposter syndrome normally, but I think working from home has exacerbated that a little bit, because you never know. You've had a conversation with someone over Microsoft Teams or Google Hangout or whatever. You hang up the call and then you're thinking, whoa, what are they thinking? I wonder what they thought about that conversation. And you can't gauge their body language in the same way. It's really quite difficult. You can't strike up a proper relationship with these people a lot of the time. And so if you're already doubting yourself, and then you're left alone in your room, well, I'm just in my bedroom, with your own thoughts that are already quite negative anyway about yourself, it can be quite damaging, I think, because you don't necessarily have anyone to bounce ideas off in the same way. And there's been some fantastic advice in the chat. I feel like we've got my own little therapy group. So shout out to everyone that's been so kind and so lovely about that. But yeah, I think the work from home experience for me personally, although, there are obviously benefits to it, I think when it comes to imposter syndrome, it's something that I found has been quite detrimental. And I, like I said, I've only been there a week, and I love the job, and it's so rewarding in so many different ways. I love the problem areas, but yeah, I just wonder what the best coping mechanisms for that, because this is obviously something that I'm gonna have to deal with for a while.
Thanks, Tom, and good luck with your new job. I'm sure you'll be absolutely fabulous. We're into our last 5 minutes, so if I can, I'm going to go to Rita, because your book is jam-packed with proper, meaty, doable, practical advice on how to help yourself manage when the inner gremlin's starting to get the better of you. And it sounds to me like Tom, who is, I know him a little bit through Tortoise, who is incredibly intelligent, massively talented young man who's landed himself this brilliant job and is now on a Zoom call, presses leave meeting, and then thinks, oh no, I think I was terrible. Let's have fun. What can we give? What advice can we give Tom to just, we've all had that feeling. I mean, I've had it today.
Well, I think that's number one. We have all had that feeling. Call it catastrophizing or whatever it is. So, you've been in a meeting, you don't think it went well, and then you torture yourself for, the rest of the evening, you keep on going back. A couple of things I'd say about that. Number one is, an honest connection with the person on the other end of the phone, which, maybe, actually, I haven't done this before, or otherwise, I'm feeling a bit nervous about this. So you connect with people, you say something, you don't have to spend half an hour talking to them about all the terrible things you're thinking, but you say something that creates a better connection so that they understand you on a human level. I think the second thing that I found really useful, and again, wading through some of the personal development programs, I've done that so you don't have to, but visualizing, playing a tape in your mind's eye about how you want to be. It's an incredibly useful thing. Athletes do this, when they visualize crossing the line first and things like that. When you present yourself, when you are talking to people and want to give a good impression, it's a good idea to run a tape in your mind about what it is, how it is you want to be. And you can then play that to yourself just as you are about to speak. So that can give you real confidence. There are other techniques about communicating, having steady eye contact, doing deep breathing. Do you do yoga, for example? Are you into that sort of yoga type stuff, or?
I'm not that flexible, but I do guided meditations. So I'm not sure if that ticks the box there.
There we are. And the other thing, of course, if it all goes pear-shaped, rescue remedy. So this is very, very useful. It has been my constant companion, or one of them anyway, I have to say, through my working life. I recently discovered why that was. It's actually, should be flower remedy, but it's 70% alcohol. And that's possibly why it was so effective. But nevertheless, I mean, these are techniques that just keep you calm and level, eye contact, steady gaze, breathing, and so on, and running a tape in your mind about how you want it to be, and sharing with somebody when you don't think something has gone well, and say, actually, I think I could have done that better. Action is always a good remedy. Yeah.
Brilliant.
Honesty.
Thank you so much, Rita. Tom, I hope that helps. I feel really pleased that there are so many other people who are partial to a rescue remedy, because I thought it was just me, and I have been ashamed of my rescue remedy habit, and I did know it was really like having a bit of a pit flask in your handbag. I've really, really enjoyed this evening. I knew I would. Rita's book is fantastic. I do recommend it. It's called Love Your Imposters. Stevie Spring is always good value. Takumbo is super wise in doing really, really important work. And your contributions in the chat have been, as always, amazing. I'm sorry we didn't quite get round to everybody, but there's 3 things I'm going to take away with me this evening. Firstly, I think I have come down on the side of, I think that imposter syndrome happens as a combination of internal and external factors. I certainly, as I experience it myself, there are things that are being projected onto me because of what I look like, who I am, whatever. And then there are things that I am definitely churning up inside of myself for whatever reason. So I feel like in terms of coming to terms with and controlling it, I might need to negotiate and separate out what are the real things and what are the things that I'm making up myself is worth bearing in mind. The second thing is that in order to help one another, because we're all experiencing it, to acknowledge a bit more that it's normal that our working lives in particular are hard. It's normal that it's difficult and that we haven't done it before and that it might go wrong. I think that's a really helpful thing, because certainly when I'm doing my unhelpful competitive comparator group, looking at all the women in particular around me who've had better careers than I have, you know, I think that everybody else is just absolutely swimming along and it's all super fine and they've never gone home and thought, oh my gosh, I'm necking half a bottle of wine and it was a disaster. I know that isn't the case. I know that they're finding it as tough as I am. So making it normal that it isn't hard. And then I loved the thing that Takumbo said, which is take inspiration from the traits of people you admire rather than expecting that you can replicate them entirely. I think that's really interesting. What is it about that person that really makes me feel, gosh, you're incredible, rather than thinking, oh, you're so incredible and look at the gap between me and you. I think there's lots in there. Of course, make friends with finance, that's always worth doing. And thank you so much, as always, for being here this evening. We're starting again really early tomorrow morning, so if you're super on it, get up and be with us. We start at 8 a.m. tomorrow morning, talking about mandatory ethnicity pay gap reporting as part of our Responsible Business series. If you can, be there. If you'd rather have a lie-in, then join us at 1 o'clock, and we're talking about personal responsibility and the law. Have a lovely evening, a well-earned drink, a rest, an early night, whatever you want. Put the telly on, feet up, and don't let the imposter syndrome get you down, at least for today. Thank you so much. Bye.